The AI conundrum, why MCP security cannot be patched away. I think this is a really interesting sub area within AI that's really exploding right now, and it's particularly interesting in what it means for cybersecurity and cybersecurity jobs going forward. So this article that I have here is actually based on the RSAC conference preview, and they were talking about how MCP is introducing these security risks into the LLM environments that are architectural, and so they're not so easily fixable according to researchers. First, let's take a step back for those of you that may not be aware of what MCP is. It's basically a standard that was created by Anthropic, so the company behind Claude. The standard is like basically like a framework on how LLMs can integrate with external data sources securely. So one such example is if you think of like a USB port, right? That's like a universal port that is meant for connecting your devices, your sources, and it's like a standard that, many different devices can use. And so similarly, when you have LLMs, right, at the very beginning, we just had LLMs that were just chatbots, and that was the limit of what they could do. They would suggest to you to do something, to take some kind of action, but they didn't have the capabilities on their own to go and take actions like, say, create calendar invites on your Google Calendar or modify some kind of data on your server. Now, with the introduction of MCP, you can connect them to different data sources like your Google Calendar, your servers, your pretty much anything under the sun that you can think of nowadays, like, is integrated with this. If you're thinking about this just from, traditional security, right? It's like with the greater the scope, the bigger the attack surface, right? So the more capability something has, the greater the attack surface that can then be abused. So as you might be imagining, this is going to have very far reaching, far sweeping ramifications. This is something, though, at the same time, this technology, the cat's out of the bag, right? I don't think there's going to be a situation when we go back and be like, just kidding, guys, this is too risky from a security standpoint, so let's forget this technology ever existed. Let's go back to before we started using this. No way, right? Companies are going to be using it whether the security people like it or not. So as security professionals or aspiring security professionals coming up, right, we have to have a good understanding of what are these security issues, because this technology is here to stay. So it's going to come down to what are our best practices, what are our ways of securing this, of dealing with the fact that this is the cat's out of the bag, and we're going to have to operate with this and secure it the best that we can. So let's dive in a little bit more to this article and see what it is they're talking about. So one of the things that you might know about LLMs in general is there's something called prompt injection, right? That is whereby LLM technology architecturally just has a very hard time, if not impossible time, distinguishing between what is data and what is part of the prompt. When you have things like, we just simplify this, thinking about direct prompt injection where someone's typing something into a chatbot, part of that data that you're feeding it in there, it could contain maybe data to say like, hey, here's like the transcript for my video. And in that transcript, maybe you have some instructions. It doesn't know like what's part of the transcript, what's part of the instructions. It does its best guess to kind of discern that, but it doesn't really know. Then you have something called indirect prompt injection, where it might be fetching something from another source. So maybe, you give it a URL and say, hey, go to this page, like summarize the article on this page. And in that article, it has a prompt injection, basically a prompt information. When it goes and parses that, then it thinks, oh, this is part of the user's prompt, when really it's just part of the article that you want it to summarize, right? That's my quick and dirty explanation, like example of what these are. And this is something that, people have sat around in rooms like Jason Haddock, some of the foremost leaders in cybersecurity, the foremost leaders in AI technology, people like Sam Altman. They all sat around. They said, hey, as of now, I don't know that we will ever get to a point where we can actually solve the issue of prompt injection, because it's so inherent to how this stuff was designed. So a lot of what this article is talking about is, given that that is the case, what are some guardrails or extra security measures we could pair alongside of this to basically work with what we have to secure this stuff well enough that we can sleep at night? The game has changed, right? Dynamic changes completely with MCP because the LLM is no longer just generating a response, but is executing real actions on behalf of the user. That's the whole point of MCP. And in this type of environment, it will trigger these workflows, call APIs, and make decisions autonomously. So that's the real risk. That's the real danger, right? So this is what I was talking about right here. The major issues, it cannot distinguish between the content and the instructions, essentially. That's a quick summary of what I was trying to explain earlier, if that didn't make sense. So with that said, it was talking about other attack vectors with this stuff too. Things like poisoning a tool. So let's say, for example, that an attacker gets access to one of the tools that is plugged in through the MCP. Well, they could poison the tool whereby they embed some malicious prompt instructions within that tool so that when the tool goes out and LM goes out and uses that tool, it then sees that poison data and thinks that it's part of some kind of prompt. And there's a lot of creative ways that attackers can hide these instructions, and maybe in a place in the tool where you wouldn't think to look, or it would be hidden from a user perspective when you're using the tool. But when it's called by the LLM, by the AI, it absolutely will see it and it absolutely will execute those instructions as instructions. These are some of the attacks that are kind of floating around there that is going to be really difficult to secure going forward. So one of the things they're proposing in this article, and this is something to be aware of as you guys are trying to position yourselves to get into this field, which, by the way, if you want to position yourself to get into cybersecurity, AI security is one of the best skill sets. This is a golden time to learn this. Right now, not everyone knows this stuff. In the future, that will change. If you want some guidance in that area and to really streamline your process into landing your first job in cybersecurity, check the link down in the description below, and we can jump on a call and I can give you the full roadmap based on your background and your situation. But without further ado, let's get right back into it. So they're talking about some different attack scenarios that could happen as well. We mentioned a few already. And like, you could also take over the MCP server itself through some kind of malicious update and stuff like that. But we're talking about, this traditional way that you secure against this is, oh, just apply some kind of patch, update a patch, or maybe there's like some misconfiguration that we got to solve, right? If you guys have been learning cybersecurity for any amount of time, you're probably familiar with those two things, patching and configuring it more securely. Well, that's actually not a viable solution in here because it's architectural. This is how this stuff is designed to work. So what they're proposing instead for the meantime is things like guardrails. Like, what are some extra security measures that we can start imposing as security professionals to better secure this, given that it's architecturally kind of insecure, right? So one of the things they're talking about is, having regular scanning done on the tools to look for and hunt down potential malicious instructions that could be used to poison the tool and get a prompt injection or something like that. You can see here like the auditing and things like that. Also, least privilege, and this is going to be huge, I think, in MCP and in AI technology going forward, is everyone wants to give it all the access, all the, so it can do everything. And they want these tools that have all the bells and whistles. But again, going back to what I was saying earlier, attack surface, right? If it has God level privileges on all your stuff, well, that's a God level risk, essentially, right? Because if that gets compromised, then the attacker has God mode privileges as well. So enforcing least privileges and really sitting down and talking with the company and seeing like, okay, what is the actual business use case for this? And what are the least privileges that we can give? And that's something that is going to take a human to do, to have that knowledge, to have that expertise. So that's one of the reasons I think that, cybersecurity is not going to be fully replaced by AI anytime soon. I think that it's going to enhance what we do, and it's going to make us even more effective at our jobs. But at the end of the day, this AI technology that everyone wants to integrate, what is it? TriHackney was trying to replace pen testers essentially with their AI tooling and stuff. And even they kind of acknowledge like, this is not really going to replace yet, because there's things like this, right? You could give your AI bot, the MCP, and access to all your stuff, and, it would have a lot of knowledge to go and secure a lot of things, but then it becomes a security issue as well. So having a real human in the mix to understand the stuff is really important. And these are challenges that are still, to be honest, being fleshed out by companies like, okay, how do we secure this stuff the best given everything? The other suggestion is logging all the MCP traffic so you can spot those anomalies if your AI tooling starts behaving oddly, right? If it starts, maybe there's some indicators that some prompt injections are going down in your environment, it's going to be important to log and monitor all of that stuff and create some alerts and ways to flag agent activity when it deviates from the expected behavior. And scanning the tool metadata and stuff for malicious instructions, like I was saying earlier, these are all ideas that are floating around out there in the ether as the best practices to secure ourselves given this crazy technology. What do you guys think? Do you have maybe some interesting ideas of what else we could, maybe the article didn't list for securing against this stuff as well? Let me know down in the comments section below. And like I said, if you want some guidance in how to learn this key skill so that you can position yourself as one of these experts on the forefront, you best believe that that's going to help you stand out in the field when everyone else just has, like, your standard network, Active Directory, web security stuff on their resume, and that's pretty much it. Then yeah, definitely go down the link in the description below and let's talk from there.